y'all, welcome back to my channel. My name's Danielle and I'm the owner of Damn Fancy Creations and the Drunk Flamingo Glitter. If you guys are like me, then you cannot wait for fall to get here. I have been in such a fall mood lately. Obviously, my last few cups have been fall and I have much more fall tutorials planned for you guys. I just wish that this Georgia heat would cool down a little bit so that the weather would match my mindset. Our last tutorial was a little bit of a cutesy Halloween cup, and today's tutorial is the opposite of that. Today is a little bit more of a spooky Halloween vibe. I am loving the vintage floral and skulls, and then the subtle clear 3D skulls that are all over the cup just give it a little bit more of a spooky vibe. Everything you see here will be covered in today's tutorial, but if you guys have questions, please feel free to ask in the comments and I will come back and answer them for you. Don't forget to check the description where I list everything you will need to recreate this cup, as well as discount codes from my favorite suppliers. But for now, we're going to go ahead and get started on this tutorial, and I hope you guys enjoy. Alright y'all, so to get started, we're going to grab a 20-ounce skinny tumbler and a tumbler wrap. This is my vintage pink tumbler wrap. I printed this the incorrect size, which is why I am using it. I just like to use a lot of the ones that I kind of mess up on. So if this does not line up perfectly, that is why. My tumbler wraps are sized for the 20-ounce hog tumblers. And I am just cutting off all of the white right now. I am going to completely wrap our tumbler. So I just want to try to get as straight of edges as I can. And to get my tumbler wraps on my cup as straight as they can, I'm going to take my cup cradle by Cami Page Boutique, and I am going to use a Sharpie and use this cup cradle to draw a straight line right along my cup. So now we have a straight line on our tumbler. Next, I am going to peel the backing from our tumbler wrap back slightly. I am cutting a little bit off, and I am going to place this vinyl right on that straight line. I'm going to wrap it around my tumbler just to make sure that everything lines up perfectly. This one will obviously not line up correctly because I did not have this sized for hog cups at first. They were sized for, I believe, Maker Flow or a different brand. I can't remember, but hog is what I typically use, so that is what I sized them for. So once we have everything straight on our tumbler, I'm just going to use my squeegee. I'm going to smooth the vinyl down as I roll the backing off of the vinyl. And I'm smoothing everything down in the process. So now I am going to trim the edge. I do not like to wrap vinyl on the bottom edge of my cup. Most of the time I am going to tape off my tumblers. For me, it is just easier to do it that way. Nothing is worse when you apply that final coat of epoxy and then the bottom is just slightly uneven and you have to resand and re-epoxy. So I just stopped glittering the bottoms. And this is the edging tool, also from Cami Page Boutique. We do have a discount code to her shop down below if you guys want to check out her items. Her edging tool is typically designed for vinyl, which I do use it for that, but I also use it to get clean rims for my glittered epoxied cups. So I go around the top rim the same way that I do with vinyl. I just heat up the epoxy with hot water before, and then that blade cuts right through, and that way I get a nice clean rim along the top and bottom rims of my glitter tumblers. So right now I'm just using my heat gun on a medium setting just to smooth down that vinyl and help it adhere to the tumbler well. I'm just smoothing down any air bumps that I feel. So now we have our tumbler wrapped. I love this 3D look. I think it's so fun. So next I'm going to go ahead and glitter our tumbler. I'm going to use glitter glue from Artistry. The glitter I'm going to use is Soul Taker from my shop, The Drunk Flamingo. This is one of my favorite kind of champagne-y golds. It's kind of a champagne with a little bit of pink and opal mixed in. It also has a few chunky pieces. So I'm going to use the glitter glue, and I'm just going to apply the glitter glue right along that vinyl edge, and then I'm going to bring it down the tumbler as well. When I apply the glitter glue, I'm going to apply it further down the cup than what I want the glitter to fall. That way, when I'm kind of just sprinkling some pieces further up the cup, those pieces will stick to the tumbler as well. And I have 2 containers of the glitter. You will see I have one that is just a little medicine cup with glitter, and the other container is my tea strainer. And I'm using 2 because one, we just want to pour the glitter on and get good coverage, but I'm using the tea strainer to help with the kind of sporadic pieces that I want to fall, where I just want a little bit. So here we are, just kind of filling in that edge so we have good coverage. And I am angling my cup to kind of help that glitter fall up the cup. And now I'm just going in with my tea strainer, and I'm just sprinkling a little bit of those fine pieces on. The tea strainer will prevent any of the chunky glitter from falling on the cup. So I was pretty happy with that glitter application, so I'm going to set that to the side and let it dry. Now we're going to work on our molds. So this is a mold I got off Amazon. I will link it down below. And I am just filling this with epoxy that is mixed with a little bit of glitter. I just added a little bit of opal glitter. I think I used Coconut Snowball Martini. I just wanted my little skull pieces to have just a little bit of sparkle to them. And I am using, you can use a toothpick if you have a little needle, something like that, to kind of help the epoxy get in all of the little crevices and kind of help release any air bubbles that may be trapped. And I am just filling up all of these pieces, or all of the little cavities. And when I get done filling these cavities up, I am going to pop everything with my little torch, get all the air bubbles out. Yes, I do use a torch with fast set. I use it with molds. I just don't hold the torch onto the mold to melt that silicone. I just do quick little burst. And we are going to let this set for a little while until it starts to harden up. You don't want it to harden completely. We still want this epoxy to be flexible, so that way it will form and mold to the tumbler shape. So this is just my little mini torch that I have. I got this from my Mad Glitter bag, and I think it's the cutest thing ever. So after this sets for a little while, you guys can see that it is still pretty flexible, but it is not liquid. I am going to use gloves when I am messing with these pieces because this epoxy is not 100% cured, so I do not want this to get on my hands or get stuck to me. So I am just getting these little pieces out of the cavities, and I'm just going ahead and forming this to the tumbler. So that way, when we transfer these pieces to our tumbler that has the vinyl and glitter, they will lay nicely on the cup. I would have just gone ahead and applied it to the tumbler that I was going to be using, but it was still on my turner and had epoxy on it, so there's no way for me to do that at the moment. So I just pulled out another 20-ounce skinny and placed them on there. And some of these were a little bit more flexible than others, so I did have to be a little careful not to deform them. And you guys can see that I am angling some of the skulls to the left and some to the right. That way I'm going to have options when I'm actually putting them on the tumbler, so they won't all be facing the same way. And I have not done this technique in so long. If you guys have followed me for a while, you may remember that I did a succulent version like this, as well as some turtles. I believe that was probably over 2 years ago that I did those tutorials. They are still up on my YouTube, so if you guys want to go find them, you can. And once we have all of our little pieces on our tumbler, we are just going to leave them here and let them cure completely so that they will be hard and no longer flexible. In the meantime, we are going to put 2 coats of epoxy on our tumbler that has the vinyl and the glitter. And once those 2 coats of epoxy are cured, I am going to sand it really well. And then once our little clear pieces are cured, we will be ready to start applying these to the tumbler. So these are all of my little pieces. I was just kind of messing with them to figure out where exactly I wanted to put them. And then I am going to apply them with UV resin. Since these little epoxy pieces are clear, the UV resin will be able to penetrate through the epoxy pieces and it will cure them. So I'm just curing these for about 30 seconds, and then I'm going to start applying the other pieces. And one thing I will point out is when you are attaching these to your tumbler with UV resin, I am making sure that everything is covered. I want every piece of this little guy to be covered, so that way you won't be able to see air bubbles or funny little things underneath the mold, if that makes sense. And you guys can see that once I put UV resin underneath the mold and even on top, they definitely look more clear. They just appear more white when you pop them out just because they're just because of the mold and how epoxy may have been like wrinkled to the tumbler. But once you get the UV resin underneath them and on top, they really blend in and kind of give a little spooky look, which is exactly what I was going for. And I'm just using my silicone tools to kind of cover the little 3D pieces with UV resin. I was trying to get everything done in one step. And I was going ahead and covering these with UV resin during this step just because these pieces were pretty tiny, and sometimes the first coat of epoxy can be a little tricky getting them in all of the little crevices but not having the epoxy pool in those places. So I thought it would be easier just to do it with UV resin. So that way the second coat of epoxy would go on nice and smooth. And that way I only had to do one final coat of epoxy versus two, because I didn't want these pieces to be completely smoothed out. I still wanted some texture on there, and they were a lot flatter than my typical 3D tumblers. So this is basically what you're going to do with all of your little pieces. And then I decided that I wanted to outline some of these pieces with my leafing pen. So I'm just going and kind of adding some little details with this. It's like, I think this is old gold or maybe it's bronze leafing pen. I can't remember what exactly it's called. But you can get these off Amazon, or you can get them in the leafing section of your craft stores. And I'm just going to do this for all of my little skulls. And I decided to do this because once I added UV resin on top of some of the skulls, really the smaller ones, some of the detail was lost. So I wanted to make sure that these pieces still had a lot of detail to them. So the gold leaf outline and little accents really helped that. And if you don't have a leafing pen, you can use any color. A Sharpie would work. If you have paint pens, that would work as well. If you just have regular paint, I'm sure you can figure out how to make that work. So I just went ahead and outlined all of my remaining pieces. So you guys can see how it just melts into that background. I was really digging how these were turning out. And my original plan was just to apply the 3D skulls and that was going to be it. However, once I got all of the skulls on there, I felt like the top part was a little bit more bulky than the bottom part, and it was because we had those 3D pieces. So that is why I decided to go back and add my black drips that were going up the tumbler from the bottom. And I always like to kind of explain my process or why I make decisions that I make, because a lot of times I will have a vision in my head and it won't turn out how I wanted, or it will totally change halfway through. And that is definitely okay. I know so many people just get so frustrated when their ideas don't turn out how they wanted, or it's not what they envisioned in their heads. And I am just here to tell y'all that probably 90% of the time, my design changes halfway through my tumbler, because I want something changed or something didn't look like how I wanted it to look, and that is okay. That's just part of the creative process. So I am just epoxying over everything right now. So I basically just applied a layer over everything, and now I am going back and I am just kind of digging out any epoxy that may be pulled next to these little 3D elements out of their little eye sockets, out of their wings. I also like to use my silicone tools for this. So you guys can see just how many times I actually go around my tumbler. I will just go around it multiple times until I'm happy with the epoxy coverage. And after I'm happy, I'm going to take my torch. We're going to pop all of our bubbles. And I did get my torch from CCDIY, but you can pick one up at any of your local hardware stores. I use the green camping propane with mine. So after this layer of epoxy cured is kind of when I was like, I feel like it needs something else on the bottom. So I just mixed up some epoxy and added some of my black tie mica. This has just a little bit of a shimmer to it, but it is pretty black. And I wanted to lighten it up just a little bit, so I did add just a really small amount of mother of pearl just to kind of lighten it up and give it a little bit more shimmer. So now it's kind of like a really nice dark shimmery gunmetal versus a black. Now I'm just going to use some striping tape, and I'm just going to wrap that bottom. And we are going to let this epoxy sit for just a little bit. I am using fast set. This is what I typically use for all of my drips, just my normal Artistry's fast set. And then when it starts to get a little thick, which was probably about 10, more like probably 15 or 20 minutes later, I like mine thick, really thick. So it is barely moving here. And now I'm just going to apply this right along the edge of our tape. And I'm going to do this all the way around the tumbler. This is just so I get a nice coverage line, I guess. And then once I get my epoxy all the way around the tumbler, I am going to start looking for where drips are already naturally starting to occur. And then I am going to take just like little beads of epoxy, and I'm just going to add them to that epoxy line so it can start to drip down the tumbler. And I did make this one a little bit thicker. I did want a thicker band at the bottom. So now I'm just adding my little beads of epoxy. This is going to become our drips. And gravity will just pull that little bead of epoxy down. If you want your drips to drip a little bit more, you can always put some heat on it with your heat gun or your torch. Just a little bit though. I just do a little bit at a time because you don't want it to drip too far down and then you not be able to stop it. So I'm just kind of looking to see if I need to add any more epoxy drips. And the larger your little bead of epoxy that you put on there, the further your drip will drip down. So I'm also just popping bubbles with my little torch that I have. Kind of checking it out. And once I'm happy with this, I'm going to let it sit, let these drips cure, and then I will put a final coat of epoxy on top of these drips to seal everything in. And then after that, your tumbler will be complete. So I will show you guys how this turned out. I just think this is the perfect kind of spooky Halloween cup. And I love that those 3D pieces are there, but not in your face there. I don't know, it just adds to kind of like a spooky Halloween vibe. I just think they're so fun. If you guys decide to give this tumbler a try, please post in my Drunk Flamingo group. I love to see what inspires you guys and what y'all come up with based off of my tutorials. And I hope you guys enjoyed. If you enjoyed this tutorial or learned something new, please be sure to like, subscribe, and share. Don't forget to catch the next video coming up that was picked just for you. As always, if you're looking for more tips, tricks, or tutorials, be sure to check out my Drunk Flamingo glitter group, my Damn Fancy tutorial group, or my Damn Fancy tribe. All are linked in the description. Thanks for watching.